Good
The note will
morning.
be marked Court Exhibit 6, Madam Clerk. The note is dated the 1st of March, 2024, 10:50 a.m. By the jury foreperson, Your Honor, the jury has reached a unanimous verdict for all 6 counts. Marked as Court Exhibit 6, signed by the foreperson. Can bring the jury in. The counsel stipulate, please.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the clerk will ask you a series of questions. Please pay close attention to Madam Clerk.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as your names are called, can you please rise, remain standing, and indicate your presence by saying either here or present?
And you can mute, Madam Clerk.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the case of the state of Connecticut versus Michelle Traconis, have you agreed upon a verdict?
Yes.
Will the foreperson please rise and identify himself? Everyone else can have a seat. Will the defendant, Michelle Traconis, please rise and face the jury? In file number FST CR 20-024-1178T, State of Connecticut versus Michelle Traconis. What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty of the first count of the information charging the defendant with conspiracy to commit murder in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A, 48A, and 53A-54A, subsection A?
Guilty.
What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty on the second count of the information to the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-155, subsection A, subsection 1?
Guilty.
What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty on the third count of the information to the charge of tampering with physical evidence in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-8, subsection A?
Guilty.
What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty on the fourth count of the information to the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-48, subsection A, and 53A-155, subsection A, subsection 1?
Guilty.
What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty on the fifth count of the information to the charge of tampering with physical evidence in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-8, subsection A?
Guilty.
What say you, Mr. Foreperson? Is she guilty or not guilty on the fifth count of the information to the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree in violation of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-165, subsection A, subsection 3, and 53A-166?
Guilty.
You ladies and, I'm sorry, one moment. The court will then accept the verdict.
The verdicts are accepted and recorded.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the jury be polled, please.
You have the polling document, Madam Clerk.
I will call upon you one at a time and ask you to rise and remain standing when called. Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information of the charge of conspiracy to commit murder?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence? Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree? Thank you. Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of tampering with physical evidence?
Yes.
Is it your verdict that the defendant, Michelle Traconis, is guilty to the information on the charge of hindering prosecution in the second degree?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you may return to the deliberation.
If I may be heard, Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point, the state is moving the court to revoke the defendant's bond, or in the alternative, at a minimum, double it and make significant conditions upon her release if she were able to make it. She no longer entertains the privileges of the presumption of innocence, as she has been found guilty by a jury of her peers of all 6 counts. One of those counts being a conspiracy to commit murder. There's also another warrant being prepared currently for her with respect to the charges of contempt of court. And if she is going to be making any kind of bond, the state would ask for strict conditions of house arrest and electronic monitoring, GPS bracelet. However, considering the fact that she has absolutely no ties to the state of Connecticut, has significant ties out of the country, let alone out of the state feels that this would be appropriate to revoke her bond in its entirety. So the state would ask for that.
Counsel.
Well, as far as I know, Connecticut does not have a no bond rule until sentencing and appeal. So that would not be even within the purview of the court. But I'll just note, for almost 5 years, Ms. Traconis has been out on a for at least over 4 years at this point, $2.1 million bond. She's appeared at every court appearance that was required. She has been allowed to travel. The state has continued to hold her passport. I am in possession of her Venezuelan passport, and I've had it since I've been in the case. And in any event, the United States does not have diplomatic relations with Venezuela, so she wouldn't even be able to obtain another one from that country. So I asked the court to maintain the current bond. She has a teenage daughter that she is, and at least for the time being, remains the primary caregiver for her. She's appeared at all times. Her family all live in the United States. She's an American citizen. And I asked that the court not increase her bond and let her remain at liberty until sentencing. Thank you.
So the bond set only on docket number ending in 1178.
I would refer to the clerk, Your Honor. with
I
respect
could
to the
answer
bonds.
that question. The first docket
The court is going to
number,
refer to the clerk.
We did a motion for joinder. The other 2 cases are closed out. So everything's on 1178.
Thank you.
and does the court wish to know how much there was on the other cases as well, or no? 'Cause-
Well, it's only one docket number.
Right,
The court is going to set the bond on one docket number,
yes.
$6 million cash assurity.
Give me a watch. Here, one. Give me a watch.
Oh, Your Honor, I would ask if the court is going, since the court is setting a bond, that if she does happen to make it, we are looking for conditions.
Court will impose the following additional conditions: house arrest, electronic monitoring, GPS monitoring. And the passport has already been surrendered.
I believe we need a date for sentencing, Your Honor, and a PSI.
Madam Clerk, sentencing date.
Hold on 1 second. So we can do May 24th.
Perhaps that would be an inappropriate day, Your Honor.
Yes, if we could, please do the week after.
May 31st.
Thank you.
May 31st sentencing. Stand adjourned.
All rise. The Honorable Superior Court now stands adjourned. Everyone, please.
Okay, that makes sense. But what more justice could she have than to have her person that's involved in her murder be sentenced? I think that would actually be very appropriate. Okay, well, guilty on all counts. So let's go over to the Rust trial. We're 16 minutes behind the current time, so that won't take us long to get caught up. And let's check it out. I'll note that they didn't call the jury back in, but they seem to have been late in getting the camera for the all stand for the presence of the jury. So now let me turn up the speed here. We'll be caught up by the time they have the first break. I heard some interesting commentary yesterday on the lawyer about inappropriate lawyering, which led to the judge's ruling that all sidebars must be done up at the bench. Apparently, the prosecutor was saying too many inappropriate comments, attacking the defense counsel, and the defense counsel it seemed to be working as a tactic because the defense counsel wasn't objecting to things they should have objected to in several instances. And it turns out that the chief defense counsel isn't a criminal lawyer. Guess what? He is a real estate lawyer. And so he's not really an expert.
All right, good morning, jurors. You may be seated.
Well, they called the witness to the stand first. That's bizarre. So I didn't miss out. Okay. Yes, and they're going to be cross-examining her on
Ms.
that point.
In this case, you agreed to cooperate with the state. Is that true?
Yes.
And you agreed to come in and testify against Ms. Gutierrez Reed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as part of that, you entered into a cooperation agreement with the state. Is that right?
Yes.
And that cooperation agreement indicates that if you agree to testify and you have to provide truthful testimony, that you will not be prosecuted for any crime. Is that right?
Yes.
So as part of your being here, you have a complete immunity from being prosecuted, correct?
I guess.
Well,
Can you speak up, please?
Yes. Sorry, I'm
was,
close.
it's okay. Is that better? Is that your understanding of the document that you have a complete, that you're not going to be prosecuted, correct?
Yes.
Now, you testified yesterday that you had, as far as the props roles, you were Hannah's boss in that role. Is that right?
I wouldn't say boss, I guess a supervisor. What I said goes with props.
And Hannah was a props assistant, correct?
Part-time,
Okay. And she was also a part-time armor?
full-time.
Your understanding she was part-time props and full-time armor?
Armor was her main duty, yes.
Okay, but she was also doing props as well, correct?
When there was no firing of any guns, yes.
Well, didn't you ask her on several occasions, for example, to do things like rolling cowboy cigarettes?
That was one day.
Well, you asked her to prop up other characters at times, right?
The only props that other characters had were the guns.
They didn't have their belts,
Well, yeah, they had belts.
and they didn't have, for example, glasses or other items that they needed to have on them.
What type of glasses are you talking about?
Anything you have in a Western movie, hats, glasses, they didn't have other props?
Those are wardrobe.
Okay, what other props were there with regard to these actors besides firearms?
There were very miscellaneous things depending on the scene. There was a day where we were in a saloon. There were whiskey glasses. There were rolled cigarettes. There were poker sets, those kind of things.
And those props had to be provided to those actors, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and you also testified that you had some armor duties, correct?
correct,
And so you were in that role assisting Ms. Gutierrez Reed, right?
correct,
And as part of that, you loaded and unloaded guns on the set?
correct.
Now, you were trained, I think you said, by Seth Kenny on a prior film.
Yes,
How much training did you receive from Seth Kenny?
I had maybe 10 days of prep for that set. So within that amount of time, when I would meet him, he would show me how to work with the guns and ammo.
So did you feel proficient, very good in working with guns and ammo?
In what I was using, yes.
Were you, I think you've said in the past, and you can tell me if you disagree, that you were not able to tell a dummy round from a live round?
I don't recall saying that.
Now, yesterday you testified that you weren't familiar with the single action revolver. Is that right?
I didn't say, or are you talking about when I entered or started Russ?
Yes.
Yes.
And so as we sit here today, do you know the difference between a single action and a double action?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is that difference?
Well, what we were using on Russ, on between the two, it involves how you load them and unload them, from my
What is
understanding.
the difference in functional characteristics between a single action and a double action?
So with the single action revolver, I believe that's what we were working on with Russ. That was with cocking the hammer back and the trigger at the same time to load and unload the cylinder, whereas with a double action, that the cylinder flips out.
The cylinder flips out.
Sorry, the cylinder comes out on the side to load the revolver and closes back.
Before Rust, had you worked with a single action type revolver?
No.
So on the prior set with Mr. Kenny, he had just shown you a double action?
Yes.
Okay. So with yourself and Mrs. Gutierrez Reed, you also had Nicole Montoya helping, is that right?
Correct.
And Nicole Montoya was also a props assistant, is that right?
Yes.
Now, I think you said yesterday that you knew that there was going to be an armor and an armor's assistant. Did you say that?
I knew that Hannah was going to act as both.
Okay. Was it your understanding that on this film that there was supposed to be an armor and an armor's assistant at first?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to your armor duties, we know that you loaded and unloaded weapons. Did you also take those at times to the actors?
Yes.
And I think we saw a video yesterday where, and see if you remember the scene, Mr. Baldwin is coming out of a little structure. He's shooting towards the cameras of the blank ground. He runs up the hill with the child actor, and then he gets, and somebody yells cut, and he still shoots, and then he cusses. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
And it appeared, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were on that video running towards Mr. Baldwin after he shot. What happened?
I'd have to see the video.
Okay. But you don't recollect it right now as we sit here.
Not at the moment.
Okay. On how many occasions did you yourself take firearms to actors?
Whenever Hannah needed it.
Okay. When she needed assistance?
Yes.
Okay. You were working under Seth Kenny's license, is that correct?
Yes,
And that's with PDQ props?
correct.
And as part of that, are you on his paperwork as being an employee?
I believe so.
And so you weren't actually working physically at his business, but you were on the paperwork, you were working with PDQ props. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
Okay. Now, yesterday you indicated that first you said that you had thrown away the revolvers, but that was just you just got ahead of yourself. Is that right?
yes,
Okay. In reality, what you did is you threw away rounds from 2 revolvers. Is that correct?
correct.
And that was right. That was after the shooting, correct?
Yes.
Now, after the shooting, do you recall how many minutes went by, just roughly, before you threw away those rounds?
I don't recall.
In that time frame, you also had a conversation with Seth Kenny, correct?
Yes,
And on that conversation, you had texted him previously before that and said emergency?
after the incident, yes.
And then you all talked, and do you recall him giving you any instruction or advice as to what you were calling about? And don't tell what he said, but do you recall him giving you any information?
No,
Okay. So do you recall anything from that phone call? Again, not telling us what Mr. Kenny said, but you recall anything from that phone call?
yes.
What do you recall?
Just him mortified.
Okay. And don't talk about his words again, but just so your impression was he was mortified.
Yes.
Okay. How long did that phone call last?
As I said yesterday, possibly 30 seconds, a minute.
So then in that time frame, you then throw rounds away from the 2 revolvers that you had previously loaded, right?
I believe so, yes.
So the 2 revolvers that you loaded, again, were the Jensen Ackles revolver, right? And then this Sven,
Swen.
how do you say his name?
Swen,
Okay, Sven. So those 2 revolvers, you threw the rounds away from,
yes,
and you threw them in a trash can.
correct.
Now, you didn't tell anybody at the scene that you had thrown those away, right?
I didn't tell anyone, but it was in a public place. If someone saw me, then yeah.
Well, you didn't want to let anybody know that, did you?
They weren't the rounds in question, so I didn't think it mattered, and I had honestly forgotten.
Well, you knew that somebody had been shot, at least one person had been shot, correct?
Correct.
You knew that 911 had been called, is that right?
I didn't hear anybody call 911, but I had assumed.
And you would have assumed that the police would have to respond to a shooting, correct?
Sure.
And so as part of that, wouldn't you think that the police would want to see everything on set?
Yes.
So when you throw away rounds that they may have wanted to see, don't you understand that to be an issue?
No, because again, it wasn't the rounds in question.
But that isn't your determination, right? To determine what's in question. That is the law enforcement's determination, correct?
Okay,
Well, would you agree with me on that?
sure.
So law enforcement's going to come and you understand they're going to investigate what happened. And the rounds that you're throwing away could be possible evidence that would assist them. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
And so when you made that decision, was that in fact Mr. Kenny directing you to do something?
No,
You threw away those rounds and the 2 revolvers that you loaded. Was it your intention to get rid of the evidence that you had done? In other words, the 2 you had loaded?
no,
Now, you also, as I understand, took firearms, or you and a couple other people intended to take firearms to the prop truck. Is that correct?
yes.
And did you take revolvers? Did you take long guns? Do you recall?
It was whatever was on the cart, but I didn't end up taking them back.
You and who was it? Was it Daniel and Nicole?
Correct.
And so the 3 of you started out to take the firearms from the prop cart to the prop truck. Is that right?
Yes.
How many firearms were there that you were taking back?
I believe from a separate interview, I had said something around 9.
So all 9 of those firearms, were those Seth Kenny's firearms?
I believe so.
All 9 you all wanted to take back to the prop truck. You were removing them from the prop cart right after the shooting, correct?
Yes,
You said you didn't take them back, but did you start with them to start taking them back?
I did.
And what made you turn around then?
I got a text message or phone call from Brian Norvell, and he asked me to bring Hannah her personal bag.
Where was her personal bag?
I believe on the cart.
So you then removed the personal bag from the cart and took that, I'm sorry?
Correct.
Okay. And then who did you take that to?
To Hannah.
When you took it to Hannah, her personal bag from the cart, where was she located when you gave that to her?
She was with Brian behind one of the houses in the town.
So we have the church, we've seen the church, and we've seen where that was located. Where was the house where Brian and Hannah were staying at that time?
It was down the hill a little northeast of the church.
Did you know why Brian and Hannah were standing over there after the shooting over by the house?
It was my understanding that Brian was consoling Hannah.
Okay. So in any event, you walked her personal bag from the cart all the way to where they were at.
Yes,
Okay. And that was at Brian Norvell's direction.
yes,
So you would agree with me, at that point, you didn't have that was somebody else telling you to do something.
yes.
Okay. And it's not your fault on that one, but in terms of taking that bag, I'm not trying to say that. But would you agree with me that that then took something from the prop cart as well
Sure.
at that moment? Okay. And again, this is before law enforcement has arrived?
I believe so, but I don't remember.
Okay. Now, yesterday you said that you had thrown away the rounds in a state of shock and panic. Do I have that right?
Yes,
Now, did you previously state that you had thrown them away because you had done that before?
I have thrown away dummies before.
Okay, so in your pretrial interview, you mentioned that part of the reason you threw those away was that you had done that before after scenes, correct?
Sometimes, yes, if I didn't need them.
So would you agree with me? You've given two explanations for why you threw away the rounds, in a shock and panic, and that you had previously done something like that, throwing away rounds. Would you agree with me?
Yes,
Are these dummy rounds? These are obviously reusable, aren't they?
they are.
So when you throw them away, somebody has paid for those, like production or, production. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Did they production instruct you to throw those rounds away after scenes?
No.
So this is their property. Would you agree with me? The dummy rounds?
I mean, you throw away blanks afterwards too.
Well, if blanks can be reused again, wouldn't you agree with me that those are something that the set could use again that they purchased?
Blanks can't be reused.
Okay, well then how about dummies?
Sure.
So again, my question was, would you agree that that's their property that you're throwing away?
I guess so.
So you made the decision to throw away the rounds, and you then interviewed with the police on October 21st. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And that was the same day?
Yes.
And do you recall whether you told them that you had thrown away those rounds?
I don't recall if I did or not.
Did you tell anybody else that you had thrown away those rounds?
I believe Nicole was standing there when it happened, so I'm sure she saw.
Okay. After the shooting had happened, did Miss Gutierrez Reed, did you see the rounds that came out of the revolver?
She showed me, yes.
And did you see what happened to those rounds after she showed you?
No.
Did you take possession of the spent casing from Miss Gutierrez Reed?
I believe I might have. I know I had said that before.
Yes. And so Miss Gutierrez Reed hands you the spent casing, which is the one that's been fired, correct?
Yes.
And then what did you do with that spent casing?
I believe I took it over to the prop cart.
What happened to the other rounds that Miss Gutierrez Reed had shown you from that revolver?
I don't know.
Did you follow up to see what had happened with them?
No.
Okay. With regard to that live round after you put it on a cart, did you touch that again?
Touch the spent casing?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So you came back over, then did you go and check other rounds to determine whether you believe them to be live?
Yes, as I said yesterday, I did check the box that was on top of the cart.
Okay. Now there were multiple boxes on the cart, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And so did you rattle some of those rounds?
And the one box, yes, that was on top.
And you determined that you believe there were, I think there was a statement that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that you thought maybe half of them might be alive?
That was an original statement, yes.
And in hindsight, do you think that's not correct?
As I said yesterday, I don't think that's correct.
Okay. But in any event, you determined that some of them were live in your belief.
Yes.
And who did you tell that to?
Law enforcement.
Okay. On the day of the shooting on October 21st, do you recall there being any safety meeting?
No.
That same day, there's no safety meeting. Do you remember right before the incident in the church, did Hannah take the revolver to go check it with Dave Halls?
Yes.
Okay. You were not in the church, correct?
I was not.
And you were located outside. Where were you?
I was at the prop truck, or not, sorry, prop cart.
Prep cart. And your cart, was it to the right of the church?
When you're looking at the church at the front door, then yes, to the right of it.
Okay. revolvers that you removed rounds from and threw them away, do you remember how many rounds were in them?
I do not.
Okay, so you're not able to tell us whether there were 6 or whether less, you don't know?
It's been 2.5 years, no.
But you did testify yesterday, you said that they were dummies.
Correct.
How did you know that?
I personally checked them.
And then you don't remember how many of them there were, though?
No.
When you interviewed with law enforcement, did they ask you for your phone?
On the day of?
Yes.
I don't believe so.
And you had been texting and talking to Seth Kenny, right?
Correct.
Had you been texting and talking to anybody else that day?
Just, I don't remember.
After the shooting, well, let me back up. Yesterday, I think you mentioned, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you wouldn't talk to Alec Baldwin much on that set. Is that fair?
No.
Okay. Did you have Mr. Baldwin's cell phone number before the shooting?
No.
Did you ever text him before the shooting?
No.
Do you recall that you did text him after the shooting?
Yes.
And how did you get Mr. Baldwin's number?
His assistant had personally contacted me because I was in contact with him while we were shooting, and he had requested to talk to me.
Okay. And so after the shooting, you and Mr. Baldwin, do you talk on the phone also?
Yes.
And you also text?
A couple times.
Do you recall making a statement on October 31st, 2021 that and do you recall you made that statement to Seth Kenny?
Yes.
How many calls, let's start with that, did you have with Alec Baldwin after the shooting?
Maybe 3.
And did you discuss the facts of what happened with him?
It was more theorizing because we both didn't know what happened. He mainly would call and ask questions that I didn't have answers to.
He was asking questions about the events and what might have happened, right?
Correct.
Did you ask him questions?
No.
You also texted with him several times. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. You recall also making a statement on or about October 23rd, 2021, that you had talked to Alec and he's having a difficult time recalling things, like most of us, but he thinks that Dave handed him the gun.
I don't know who that was with.
If I showed you a text message, would that refresh your memory?
Yes.
May I approach you?
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to show you, I'm asking you not to read it out loud, just read the top text. And when you're done reading, just let us know. Are you finished?
Yes.
And I can have it back. Thank you. Does that refresh your memory?
It does.
Okay. Do you recall making the statement that you had talked to Alec and he's having a difficult time recalling things like most of us, but he thinks that Dave handed him the gun?
I do.
And you recall making that with Seth Kenny?
Yes.
Okay. After the shooting occurred and the incident occurred, did you go back on or about October 27th for the search of the prop truck?
That would have to be the day that the police were there.
And you may not recall the day, but do you recall it being 5 or 6 days after the shooting?
I don't recall the day.
Okay. Prior to going, did you provide the code to the safe to Seth Kenny?
I believe I did.
Before you had provided him that code, who had the code to the safe?
Hannah, me, and Nicole.
You then gave the code to Seth Kenny. Did you give that code to anyone else?
I don't think so.
The prop truck search happens. Are you present for that search?
They were there before I got there. They had already started the process.
When you got there, was Seth Kenny there?
Yes.
Did you retrieve some of your personal belongings that day?
Not until after the police cleared out.
Okay. Before that search, had you retrieved some of your personal belongings from the set?
I had attempted to go back because Everyone else was able to go back to their trucks to retrieve their things, but ours was still locked, so I was not able to retrieve anything.
Ultimately, you did retrieve your property?
Correct.
Okay. At one point, there was a negligent discharge on set we've heard about, and that involved you handling a firearm, is that right?
Yes.
And again, you were trying to let the hammer down, and you had your finger on the trigger, and then it went off, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was with one of the revolvers?
Correct.
After that, didn't you have a disagreement with Ms. Gutierrez Reed?
A small one, yes.
Did you thereafter have discussions with people about wanting to fire Hannah?
I didn't want to fire her. I had my disagreements with her, but I never actually fired her or wanted to.
Okay, you said you didn't want to fire her?
No.
Do you recall being interviewed on November 2nd, 2023 in this case?
Yes.
And you were asked the question, okay, did you want to fire her? Your answer is yes, and that's on page 19, 2 to 3. Did you want to fire her? You said yes.
Okay.
Do you recall saying that?
I do.
Okay, so is it true then that you wanted to fire her?
From props, yes.
Okay, but a second ago you said you had not made that statement, but
Yeah, I'm correcting myself now.
okay. So the reality is that you had wanted to fire her.
From props.
Yes. And other people had wanted to fire her as well, right?
From Seth, or
Just in general.
I believe Seth wanted me to do something about it, yes.
And I think what you just stated is you did not do anything ultimately.
I did not know.
One of the reasons why you had wanted to fire Hannah is that you didn't feel she was doing enough with her props duties.
Correct.
And you communicated that to Hannah as well, right?
I did not.
You did not tell her that? That you wanted her to do more in her props duties?
I don't think I actually told her that. I just had asked her to do things and she didn't want to do them.
Did you know that Hannah and Gabrielle Pickle then had a disagreement over props duties?
I did hear about it, yes.
And there was an email that you knew about?
Hannah showed me, yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about the contents of it, but you did see an email on that.
Yes.
That was approximately October 16th or 17th that you had that disagreement, right?
About,
With Hannah, that small disagreement.
oh, yes.
And so that's 5 days before the shooting.
Okay.
And then at what point was the decision made by you that you wanted to fire Hannah? Was it the 16th? Was it the 17th? Do you remember what day that was?
I don't.
You talked to Seth Kinney about that.
Yes.
How many times did you talk to him about that?
I don't know.
Now, one thing I forgot to ask you was after the 21st, after the incident had happened, you don't have a good memory of the sequence of events.
I do not.
You remember that yourself and Nicole had been at the prop cart when the shot went off, is that right?
Yes.
And you did not see Hannah at that point, or did you?
I had not.
Okay. Right after it happened, is the next time that you remember seeing Hannah was when they were unloading the revolver?
No, she was in front of the church, by herself looking at the church.
Okay. And then at some point they unload the revolver and then she goes over with Brad Norvell to one of the other houses. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Did you see Hannah get loaded into the police car?
No.
After the incident took place and you come back and given Hannah her bag, did you talk to people on the set?
Yes.
And where were you standing when you were talking to people?
I was in the town at one point and then back at base camp.
So did those people include Alec Baldwin and David Halls?
No.
Who did you talk to?
Jensen and Swen and Nicole.
Did you ever see or hear about a lawyer being on set?
No.
Okay. After that, what time did you leave the set?
To go back to base camp or
To leave completely.
maybe not until 9:30.
Okay, so you stayed approximately 7 or 8 hours?
Yeah.
What were you doing during that time frame?
A lot of it was waiting around. We were at base camp for a long time, waiting to be interviewed by the police.
You were interviewed then on site?
Yes.
Okay. Since you were on site, you would have had the opportunity to tell the police at that point that you had thrown those rounds away, right?
Sure.
And you don't recall whether you did that?
I don't know.
Do you feel like that's something that you would remember if you had done it?
No.
Okay, I want to. I'm sorry, just a moment, Your Honor. Do you recall ever telling law enforcement that you had thrown those rounds away?
Yes.
When was that?
I remember telling them like a month later when I was talking to Detective Alex.
Okay, we're talking about October 21st, 21, when this happened,
Yes.
and you interviewed then, and you interviewed with Mr. Scott Elliott on November 2nd, 2023, correct?
With who? Sorry.
That was an interview with an investigator on this case. Mr. Elliott, do you recall that individual?
I do not.
Okay. In that interview, just to remind you, you had an attorney present. Do you remember that interview?
I remember Detective Alex.
Okay.
Elliott.
Do you not remember the interview in November of 2023 when Spirit Gaines was present?
I do not.
Okay. If I showed you a copy of this, would it might refresh your memory?
Can we approach?
Ma'am, I want to make sure that you're understanding what I'm asking. So you were interviewed with the police, as I understand it, 2 times. There was one on October 21st, 2021, and there was one, I think, a month later. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And do you remember being interviewed a 3rd time in a pretrial interview in this case on November 2nd, 2023? Not with the police, but with other people involved in this case.
I believe so.
Okay. And again, I'll ask you, do you remember the attorney Spirit Gaines was present?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the interview I'm talking about. That was approximately 3 months ago.
Okay.
You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall in that interview talking about whether you had informed law enforcement
Of what?
about the throwing away of the rounds?
I don't recall what I said in that interview.
Okay. So that was 3 months ago, but I know you've had several interviews, but you do not remember that.
Not the specific conversation.
Okay. In any event, you did tell them at some point you think that you threw those rounds away. Do you recall what exactly that you told them?
I don't.
Okay. Did you also tell them that you had transported those firearms from that car? Or that you had intended to, other people helped you?
I believe so.
Did you tell them that you had taken Hannah's personal bag to her?
I believe so.
Did you take anything else from the cart that we haven't talked about that day on October 21st, 2021?
No.
You also talked to Weston Brownlee after the shooting incident? Is that right?
He did send me a message, yes.
So you texted with him?
Briefly.
And that was about some of the things going on in this case, right?
Yes.
Do you recall being angry at Ms. Gutierrez Reed at one point on or about October 29th, 2021? You said, "I hope she's put in jail. This is outrageous."
I don't remember the specific text message. I'd have to look at it.
If I showed it to you, would it refresh your memory?
Possibly.
Now that you've had a chance to read it, does that remind you whether he said that?
Yes.
So you agree that she said, "I hope she's put in jail. This is outrageous."
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, one moment.
Sure.
Ms. Zachary, you mentioned earlier that you had rattled some of the rounds to check if they were live.
Yes.
Did you notice that when law enforcement got there, the boxes were closed?
I don't remember.
Do you recall closing the box up after you had rattled the rounds?
I don't recall.
When the prop truck search was done days after the shooting, do you recall the prop cart being inside the prop truck?
When police came to retrieve the weapons, I don't remember it being in the truck.
Did you go in the prop truck during the search?
After police left, yes.
Did you see the prop cart inside of it?
I don't remember.
Did you ever get the impression after in discussions with Mr. Kinney that he didn't want you to say anything
About
anything? Not talk about anything?
with just anyone?
Yes.
That wasn't my impression.
Okay. When you were touching me and you had indicated that you were talking to Alec Baldwin, and then he responds with an emoji.
I don't recall.
Okay. You don't recall ever getting an emoji with a hand over the mouth?
No.
Do you know what that means, that emoji that I'm talking about? One where it's just kind of going like that?
No. I mean,
Doesn't that mean to keep your mouth closed?
it's not what I see that as.
Okay. So in your testimony, you don't believe Mr. Kinney ever told you not to talk to people about what had happened? That's your testimony?
I don't recall.
Okay. Darren, I have nothing further.
Cross-exam, redirect you.
Ms. Zachary, I've got a few follow-up questions for you. Do you recall the specific language of your cooperation agreement with the state of New Mexico in terms of the requirement that you testify truthfully?
Yes.
Do you recall the specific language?
Oh, no.
Would it refresh your memory if I showed it to you?
Sure.
Take your time and review that paragraph, and then I'll ask you some questions about it. Are you required to give truthful testimony?
Yes.
What happens to your agreement with me if you don't give truthful testimony?
Then I'm not bound by that testimony or that cooperation agreement anymore.
Right. If you don't give truthful testimony, I can prosecute you if I want to, right?
Correct.
You were asked a variety of questions about whether or not you wanted to fire Ms. Gutierrez. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
In terms of your role as boss of Ms. Gutierrez, you were only her boss with regard to her work with props. Is that right?
Your Honor, I'm going to check the, I'm sorry. I have an objection.
Were you in charge of firearms on this set?
No.
Were you in charge of props?
Yes.
Explain to the jury what your role was with regard to supervising Ms. Gutierrez in her capacity as prop assistant versus armorer.
When it came to being a props assistant, that's where I would ask her to help me with those miscellaneous props that I had mentioned earlier. But armor is in a different department from my understanding. And so she was in charge of that. So what she said goes for the weapons, not props.
Does the armorer have autonomy when it comes to weapons?
Yes.
During the time that you worked with Ms. Gutierrez, did you find her to be easy to work with?
No.
During the time that you worked with Ms. Gutierrez as her supervisor in props, did she call you a cunt?
Yes.
Was it around that time that you decided you might want to fire her?
No, it was just overall. But
What else about working with Ms. Gutierrez was difficult other than her referring to you as a cunt?
mainly, I just felt like her work ethic wasn't the greatest. She wasn't always willing to help in a year or two. She was usually wanting to be in the truck to clean guns for the day. And yeah.
Did Ms. Gutierrez ever show up to set late?
One day, yes.
Did she give you a reason for that?
She had a migraine.
She told you she had a migraine,
Correct.
but she was able to show up and work at some point that day, right?
Yes.
So apparently the migraine didn't last all day?
No.
After the incident, did you have contact with Ms. Gutierrez when she was sitting in the back of Mr. Benavidez's police car?
I believe so, yes.
And why were you having contact with her?
I was just checking on her to see if she was okay.
And did you ask her if she was okay?
Yes.
And what was her response?
I don't recall.
Did she express concerns to you about how this might affect her career?
Yeah.
Check.
Ms. Zachary, during that conversation, do you recall Ms. Gutierrez saying anything about her career?
Yes.
And what did she say to the best of your recollection?
I don't remember verbatim, but it was about that this was going to ruin her career.
Now, at the time that she's telling you that she's worried about her career, is there a life flight helicopter on the ground waiting for Ms. Hutchins?
Your Honor, objection again.
Overruled.
I think it was before that.
It was before life flight arrived.
It was right after the incident.
But police were on set, correct?
I
Your Honor,
don't,
again.
Hang on a second. I'm sorry. I agree with you. When you spoke to Ms. Gutierrez, where was she?
she was in front of the church.
When you spoke her concern about her, where was she?
She was in the church.
I'm sorry. She wasn't in the police car.
No, we didn't talk about that at that point.
You didn't talk at that point.
Not that I recall.
Okay. At the time that you spoke to her and she indicated concerns about her career, what was happening?
Chaos. Everyone was trying to figure out what happened.
Were people screaming?
It was after Joel screamed. And I know that the script supervisor was getting angry at everyone.
Do you know, was 911 being called?
I didn't, like I said before, I didn't hear 911 call or being called, but I assumed that they were being called.
If you know, were people laying on the floor of the church?
Joel, I saw Joel at that point.
You didn't see Ms. Hutchins,
I didn't see Halyna at all.
but you understand that she was laying on the floor also.
Your Honor, objection.
At some point later, did you realize that Ms. Hutchins was injured?
I was told, yes.
And when you saw Ms. Gutierrez after the incident, was she standing at the door of the church?
She was a little further back.
At any point in time, did you see her standing at the door of the church?
No, I don't recall.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury why you thought it was important after the incident to remove the guns from the area and get them back to the truck?
And like I said, Jensen Ackles had told me to get the guns to safety. So that's what we were intending on doing, was to remove them from the site and get them back to the safe on the prop truck.
To provide Ms. Gutierrez her personal bag, is that right?
Yes.
And I want you to describe that for the jury. What did it look like?
I don't remember.
Was it the fanny pack or not?
Your Honor, objection.
That I don't think that's leaving. Was it the?
Overruled.
Was it the fanny pack?
I don't remember.
Okay. You talked to Mr. Bowles about the fact that on occasion you would throw away dummies after a scene was shot. Why would you do that?
I didn't need them anymore.
Is that something that you did when you were working on the set of Rust?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. How many times do you think you did that during filming?
I don't know.
Do you know whether production has purchased those dummies or whether they are renting them?
At the time, I had thought they were purchased, but after reading the invoices, I found out that they were rentals.
So who are they renting them from?
The vendors, Seth Kenny and Billy Ray.
Okay. At some point, you were asked by law enforcement to agree to a full extraction of your cell phone, correct?
Yes,
And did you agree to do that?
I did.
Mr. Bowles asked you some questions about your contact with Mr. Baldwin. To the best of your recollection, what specifically was the issue that you and Mr. Baldwin spoke of?
Mainly how a live round ended up on set.
So Mr. Baldwin wanted to find out how a live round ended up on the movie set, right?
Yes,
Did you also?
I did want to know, yes.
And Mr. Bowles asked you about a text message where you indicated you were trying to keep your facts straight. What did you mean by that?
I was trying to recall things correctly when I was telling people things.
Did you have difficulty recalling certain things?
Yes.
Why?
I mean, in a state of shock and when everything was crazy, I couldn't remember things quite right.
You were asked some questions about Mr. Kinney being present the day of the search of the prop truck. To be clear, where was the safe that housed the guns?
On the prop truck.
Was it inside the truck?
Yes.
And could anyone get into the safe if the truck was locked?
No.
You had to get into the truck to get into the safe.
Yes.
And you understood that the safe was locked or that the truck was locked.
Yes.
At any point in time, if you recall, did you tell production, anyone in production, that you needed more assistance with props?
Yes.
Do you know whether it was before or after that Ms. Pickle had a conversation with Ms. Gutierrez?
It was before.
Do you have any experience in police investigations?
No.
Do you have any idea what the police are looking for on a crime scene?
No.
Were the guns or the dummy rounds that were assigned to Mr. Ackles and Mr. Timmel involved in the incident?
No.
I don't have anything further.
Sure. All right, you're excused, thank you.
I'll reserve Ms. Zachary for the record.
All right, so don't talk to the other witnesses in this case, you may be recalled. Okay, so next witness. Maybe we'll take a bathroom break, just gonna.
Yes, Your Honor.
Who is,
Whatever you choose. I think he's ready, but if you'd like to take a break now, I don't know.
all right, let's take a bathroom break. Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court. We'll be back at 10. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, let's until 10 a.m. Okay, so let's see. Looks like they're late from coming back. Oops. Hmm. Okay, I'm just looking at video comment which says possible sentence for up to 50 years if all run consecutively. Bond is $6 million cash surety. Sentencing date May 31st, 10 a.m. So let me check if there's a press. We should be going back to from the break because we're currently late. Okay, I'm just looking at video comment. So it says possible sentence for up to 50 years. You're still waiting on the press conference, so Meow. Okay, just trying to do a little editing on things because I noticed that the video title was said it was day 3 of the trial. I don't know how I got that wrong. Okay, let's take a quick look at they said break until 10. It's 10:14, so I'm not sure what the delay is. I'm just looking to see what we may have in news developments. Everyone is saying hello. Ew, this doesn't look good. It says breaking news: a man who fatally shot a 20-year-old woman after the SUV she was riding in mistakenly drove into his rural driveway in upstate New York was sentenced to 25 years to life. Oh, okay, so this isn't an incident which just happened. I thought this was something that was just coming down. Oh, somebody is a happy kitty. Now, and the analysis I was listening to on Lawyer You Know was saying that the last expert armorer that we heard from yesterday kind of takes the heat off of Alec Baldwin, and they're saying that what he said was actually rather helpful to Alec Baldwin in terms of getting off. I guess we'll see come July. Let me take a look at the local news. Oh, let's make sure that we're not having an issue. Oh, looks like we're coming back from the break now. Yay.
All right, you may be seated. Call your next witness.
The state calls Joel Souza.
Stand before the judge, raise your right hand.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Have a seat, talk into the microphone,
Thank you.
and that water is for you.
Oh, thank you.
I apologize. Mr. Souza, for the record, just state your full name.
Joel Souza.
And Mr. Souza, what? Oh, I apologize. Testing. Okay. Okay. Sir, what do you do for a living?
I am a screenwriter and a director.
I want you to move that microphone a little closer.
Sure.
Thank you. How long have you been a screenwriter and a director?
Oh, I'm a working screenwriter and director. First on the writing, gosh, let me date myself here. 15 years directing.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
How did you become involved in the movie Rust?
I had made a movie called Crown Vic that came out, I think, in 2018 or 2019. And there was a time when the actor Alec Baldwin was going to be starring in that movie. And as happens with independent movies, you get ready to go, your financing falls apart, you push the boulder uphill again, your financing falls apart, you rinse and repeat endlessly, sometimes it seems like. But the schedule sort of ran out on us and he wasn't able to star, and he stayed on as a producer. After that movie, he liked it, and I think he felt like he missed out or something. So we talked about doing another project together with him as an actor. And I had a couple of things in mind, one of which I wanted to make a Western. And he thought that sounded interesting. And so he hired me to write the script.
Okay, so you actually wrote the script for Rust.
Yeah.
And then at some point, did you begin preparations to actually turn that script into a movie?
Yeah, and it was sort of a similar situation with the one I talked about before. You meet with a lot of different people who hopefully can put financing together for you for the movie, and you get close, and then it would fall apart and get close. You have these different iterations, and you start thinking about where you're going to film. But eventually, yeah, a group of producers came on that was able to secure financing for it, and so then the discussions began about where you would film. New Mexico has a pretty robust tax incentive and works for many reasons for a Western. And then, yeah, so from that point forward, it was sort of, we would kind of in earnest begin to start preparing to go into what's called pre-production, which is just a period in the months before you actually start filming.
And how did Ms. Hutchins become involved in the movie Rust?
So over time, just generally as a director, if I would see the work of a cinematographer that I admired, I would just make a note of it, make a note of their name. And I had seen a trailer for a movie she did. I think it was called Arch Enemy. And I just was impressed visually. It looked like something that was sort of it fit my style. And so I looked into some of her other work, and I had added her to a list of other names I'd put together over the years. I can't remember what publication, if it was an American cinematographer or something like that, but they had named her one of 10 cinematographers to watch. That's a big deal. And so when the time came, generally I would ask one of the producers to start, if you could, reach out to their agents, and I could start talking to people, and these are the people I'm most interested in, and they would do that and see who's available and who's not. And then I can't remember the exact number of people I spoke to, the exact number of cinematographers. It was a decent amount, more than 7 or 8. And but it was all over Zoom. We were in the middle of COVID still. We had a very long Zoom conversation where it's those kind of great conversations where first you're sort of talking about what are your influences, what are your that, and by the end you're just enjoying a great conversation. And in the end, it had come down to her and a few other women who I was a fan of, and they were all excellent, but something about Halyna, we were really, really, really in tune with what we both thought the movie should be. She had some really interesting references she would make. And my references would always tend to be a little more mainstream, and she would be talking about some avant-garde Russian filmmaker, and that's a hole in my game, and she was going to fill it, and I loved that. And so that's how I asked the producers to told them that's who I wanted. Please don't botch the deal, and because she's great, and so that's how we came to work together. So.
And during the time that you knew Ms. Hutchins, did you get to know anything about her background?
Yeah. I mean, she has this backstory that you don't forget when you hear it, right? I mean, she was born in the Ukraine, and but she'll tell you, she says, "Oh, yeah, I grew up in this naval submarine base."
Mr. Souza, without saying anything that Ms. Hutchins said to you, can you give the jury an idea of the kind of education and training that Ms. Hutchins received after she came to the United States?
Yeah, I know that she had spent a little time at the University of South Carolina. It's my understanding that's where her and Matt actually met.
And who's Matt?
Her husband.
Okay.
She would have been her husband, Matt Hutchins. I know she did a program at UCLA. I think it was the producer's program. I know she did the master's program at AFI, American Film Institute.
And do you recall when she completed the master's program through AFI?
Oh, that I'm not sure. Gosh.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm not sure when. I know she did. She was very, very interconnected with AFI.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did her background and training, did that go into part of your decision to bring her onto this project?
Yeah, it's. I'm always impressed when AFI's name in our business. I think it's as a woman cinematographer, I think that's doubly impressive. Just because if you look at the numbers in this business, they're sort of atrocious in that regard. But yeah, I think in that coupled with the work I'd seen from her, and just she was very keen to do a Western, as I think all filmmakers are. Because it's just a really interesting thing to do visually.
Okay.
And but I think between those things, between her work and her her background, I think she was kind of a no-brainer to me.
At some point, did you and Ms. Hutchins come to Santa Fe to begin pre-production work on Rust?
We did, yes.
Approximately when was that?
Oh gosh, let me think back about this. We filmed in. Sorry, I don't want to conflate it with the second go round. We were filming in October that time, so I believe we would have come out, if I go back, September in, I guess it would have been late August. Yeah, or the tail end of August or beginning of September. But yeah, we both came out around the same time. She came from Los Angeles. I live up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I came from there. And I think she might have gotten there either the day before or after me.
Can you explain to the jury how members of the crew are hired? What goes into hiring camera people and armorers and prop assistants?
Sure. I think the department heads will sort of pick their team. Like for the camera team, Halyna would put the word out. She'd go to people she'd worked with before. She would, through the union maybe, or she would basically collect resumes of people, collect recommendations from people. She would make the choices of who she would hire on a camera team. In terms of the production designer is the head of the art department, so he would pick his prop master, his set decorator, and then those people would also then pick armorer and prop assistants and people like that. The department heads would generally sort of hire their own, or at least interview and then recommend the hires to the production office.
Okay. And approximately, if you recall, when did you first meet Ms. Gutierrez?
In person, I had a phone call with her before I ever met her. One of the folks from the production office, I can't remember if it was Gabby or Roe, had told me that they had found an armorer. They told me that it was Hannah Gutierrez Reed. I had, of course, heard of Thel Reed. In the business, who hasn't? And so they told me that they had found her. I was keen on having what's called a show and tell, where you lay it out on tables and you would then match the cast up with what looks best for their characters and makes the most sense story-wise. So the production had her call me, and she introduced herself to me, and we spoke over the phone the first time then. And then a few days later, I can't remember exactly how much, it was a day later, a few days later, I met her in person at the show and tell, and then she was training people that day as well.
And at some point, I presume that filming begins and a lot of work begins. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the pre-production itself is an enormous undertaking as well. But yeah, we eventually got to our first day of filming, yes.
I want to ask you a couple of, well, prior to your work on Rust, had you worked on any other movies where there were real firearms and an armorer?
The movie I had done before Crown Vic was a movie about police. And although most of the movie was spent with the two characters driving in a car, so they didn't have anything on them, there were a few occasions we had some armorer days where, there were police weapons and then an armorer there with that.
Do you recall how many days you got to experience an armorer on set?
Maybe 3 or something, like 3 or 4. It wasn't an enormous amount of days, but we didn't have, there was not a lot of gunfire on that movie, frankly.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of what your focus is in a given day on the set?
Yeah, it's mostly about like who you work with and interact with most. My most direct interactions are with my director of photography, and there's a byproduct of that, the camera team. But you're also talking to wardrobe and production design a lot because you're moving from set to set. They're asking you, is this right? Is this okay? Is this okay? So in general, yeah, I would work, my script supervisor is always there with me as well. But in general, you work with the creative departments. You are spending a ton of time with your cast, with your actors. You're blocking the scenes out. You're walking them through their performances. You're sort of getting on the same page together.
Are you largely focused on the behavior of the armorer?
No. No, I mean, you see them when they're there at set, but no, I don't generally interact with the armorer during the course of the day on set.
Okay. And let me ask you, after the show and tell and the training that you described, did you reach out to Ms. Gutierrez and compliment her?
Well, there was a day so I think, if memory serves, I think the first day of gunfire on the movie was day 3, because that was sort of, that day was on my mind from Jump Street with this production, because it was our biggest day of the movie. It was just to give you sort of an idea of the scale of the day. It was not just, we had a large part of the day there was an enormous shootout going on between these bad guys and good guys. I think 4 people on one side and 4 people on the other side. There's an enormous amount of stunt work that goes with that. There's gunfire, there's the actors. But then before that, there's also, we were walking the characters through town. So the town was filled with background, which is what we call the extras who come. There were horses, there were wagons. It was an enormous day. And at the end of the day, we had made it. And it was a tough day. And when we have days like that, I generally like to go around and thank folks. And I just didn't find her on set at the end of it. But the day came off, and I think, everybody had a big part in that. So.
Okay. And after that day, you were complimentary of her?
After that day?
Or on that day?
On that day, yeah.
And you were complimentary of the other folks on set that day?
Yeah. No, it's anyone's ever sent set, but it's quite a thing to see. The people, okay. It's just a lot of professionals doing some pretty amazing stuff. So.
Okay, great. Can you explain to the jury what Video Village is, and specifically what it was on the set of Rust?
So Video Village is basically a sort of large awning or tented area. There'll be a lot of chairs inside there for cast to sit, producers to sit. There's generally a chair for me, which I should have used and never did. I just tend to stay on my feet all day. And then there will be monitors that are basically a feed to the cameras that we're using. So you can watch what the camera sees essentially from what they call Video Village. So you can watch the takes as we're doing them. Sometimes as a director, you'll watch from Village. Sometimes you'll watch from set. I think every director has a different way they like to do it. For me, it's kind of a mix.
And inside Video Village, can you see what the camera sees when the cameras are not rolling?
Yeah, as long as the monitors are up. Sometimes you're dealing with wireless transmitters and things, and it seems like on any set I've ever been on, people are constantly kind of running behind the monitors and fussing with cables and transmitters and things, and monitors not down, and then it's up, and then it's down. But in general, yeah, you can see whatever the camera sees. If the camera's powered on, you can see what's going on.
Based on your experience as the director of Rust, was Video Village a place that you would frequently encounter Ms. Gutierrez?
No, you don't ever see it. Armorers are never in Video Village. They should be next to set.
Can you recall a single time that you saw Ms. Gutierrez in Video Village?
No.
All right. And can you tell the jury generally what your understanding was of where the armor is supposed to be if the actors are using their prop guns that are real, they're real revolvers that they're using as prop? Where's the armor supposed to be?
Basically off camera. I mean, there's crew on set, so you'll sort of behind the camera, there are grips, there's the operators, there's sort of the people that are sort of where the camera can't see them, and you would generally expect the armor to be just sort of standing off screen, ready to hand or retrieve when we're starting or finishing the weapon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you ever under the impression, based on your experience, that it would be appropriate for the armorer to leave real weapons with actors and then leave the area?
No, that wouldn't be what an armorer should do, at least in my experience.
Okay. And can you give the jury an idea of, at the beginning of the filming of Rust, did you even understand what a dummy round was?
Not really. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of exposure to that kind of stuff before. I wonder, I don't exactly have a clear memory of it. I have a feeling the first time I heard the word dummy is after everything happened, to be frank.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, during the time that you were the director on Rust, and to be clear, you are directing the scenes.
Yes.
So when the actors are outfitted with their revolvers and they're preparing to film the scene, you're the person that's there directing. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm talking it through with the actors. Yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to see Ms. Gutierrez engage in her armor duties by providing firearms to actors or retrieving those firearms?
Yeah, I remember times seeing her do that. I do, yes.
Was there ever a time, well, let me ask you this. When we talk about how the armor and the assistant director are you familiar with the way that the armor and the assistant director are supposed to do a safety check of guns?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of it.
Okay. And what is your understanding of whether or not the armorer should load the gun in the presence of the assistant director?
Ooh, to be honest, that I don't really know.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's supposed to come to that moment loaded or if they're supposed to do it in that exact moment. That I'm not certain.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever see Ms. Gutierrez load a gun with dummy rounds in the presence of the actor or the assistant director?
I mean, gosh, nothing that really sticks out to me. I remember times when she would call out what was in it, but I don't remember really seeing her specifically putting things in.
Okay. Do you ever recall any safety checks where you saw Ms. Gutierrez shake rounds before loading them into the gun?
I never saw anyone shake around, no.
Thank you. What is your understanding of the overall, I would say, for lack of a better word, the overall amount of power that the armorer has over the firearms and ammunition on the set?
Well, I would say that specifically since it's such a safety matter and it's such a specialized matter, that there's really no one on set that should be able to override the armor in terms of the weapons, the ammunition, how they're handled, anything. What the armorer says goes.
And would that include the star actor and producer, Mr. Baldwin?
It would include anybody, yeah.
Okay.
Need help with your divorce? Call us. Brown Family Law.
Calls that were in place on the set of Rest. We understand that this was during COVID. Tell us how that worked.
Yeah, it was during COVID. We would come to set in the mornings. You'd get in a big line. They would have the people doing the testing. I believe they had like a trailer there there was a specific kind of testing you would do that would be more like the quick nasal swab, and there was the kind that would take longer to process. They would do both. People would mask, particularly indoors, were encouraged to. I think, everyone tried to be extremely careful, and to my knowledge, we never had a positive test on the show.
Okay. Was there any kind of a requirement on the set that people needed to leave, let's say, the church or another indoor filming area to reduce the number of people inside due to COVID?
Nothing I ever heard of. No, the people who had to be there. So.
I am going to, let me ask you, you wrote the script, so are you familiar with all of the scenes that were to be recorded? You understand now what dummy rounds are used for?
Yeah. They're essentially, you put them in so that if there's a No, there was not.
Based on your understanding of the scenes in the script, can you think of any reason that dummy rounds would have been placed inside that?
I believe the only thing that rifle was going to be used for there's one scene where it fires and accidentally kills somebody, but we were never rifle fire in any way because it's an underage actor in that scene holding the weapon, and so we were just going to CGI the blast.
Okay, and when you say CGI,
just digitally in the special effects.
Hypothetically, if that rifle was going to be used for actual firing, Would it have blanks in it and not dummies?
Your Honor, object.
Approach.
To be clear, can you think of any reason, and I mean in terms of cinematography and what you understand filming of the scenes, that rifle needed to have dummy rounds?
You wouldn't see them. I mean, dummies are purely visual. If they go into the rifle, they disappear into the rifle, so you wouldn't see them. So you would.
I'm going to take you to October 21st of 2021. Can you explain to the jury how that day began?
Yeah, we got there early as we always did. It was still dark. Gaffer was waiting there for me with mittens and a hat for both me and Halyna, as he always did.
And who was the gaffer?
Serge Svetnoy.
Okay.
And we had realized that I think it was 6 members of the camera team were going to be leaving. And so we knew we were going to not get started really. It was very early. I think Halyna knew that they were going to have to start finding other local folks that were available for work to get us there. And so things started a little later that day than they generally did. And once, I don't remember exactly the number of people that were brought in after the other team had left.
I'm gonna stop you right
Sure.
there. In your experience in the film industry, is it unusual for this kind of a disagreement to occur between production and the camera team?
I haven't had it happen on one of the movies I've directed, but I know other folks who have had that happen, yes.
And were you particularly concerned about whether the cameramen that quit were disgruntled or had any malintent towards the filming?
I wasn't concerned about anybody having any malintent. I think there was a decent amount of acrimony between them and the production office and producers over some things that have been sort of going back and forth. I think they sort of, keep that thing away from me, but I hear things, what's going on? You want people to be happy. You want people to feel good about what they're doing. So
did you think that the camera crew's decision to leave was somewhat reasonable?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I wouldn't want to answer for them. I knew it was going to put us behind the 8 ball a little bit, but then again, people have their concerns. People have bills to pay. They have their own needs. You know, at the end of the day, they did what they did. When they left, I went and shook hands, and I had no hard feelings. And I hope they had no hard feelings toward me, and said I hope we would work together again, because frankly, they were pretty darn good at what they did.
Okay.
But you know, I think again, I'm not 100% privy to all the goings on there, but I think, you know, people have their concerns and the things they need to do. I think they felt they did what was right. So.
Okay. So you get to set, you understand that you're going to lose the camera crew, and I think we left off where
Yeah.
Ms. Hutchins was going to try to fill some of those roles.
Yeah, I think between, you know, Halyna and I think the production office, they would start putting out some feelers in an urgent manner that we need, you know. And so then at some point, some folks came. I don't know exactly how many, there might have been 3 or 4. We were going to be down a camera that day because one of the folks that left was the A camera operator. And so we knew we were going to be operating under only one camera for the rest of the day, which, I mean, sometimes you do only use one camera when you're filming, but, you know, that's going to slow you down, because sometimes when you're filming, you can have 2 cameras catching something at once. And now you're going to need to do that twice. So it's going to take twice time. And so, yeah, we were sort of gearing up and girding ourselves for that, and talking about our plan for the day, how we were going to go about this. Because it was already, schedule-wise, it was already going to be a difficult day.
So what was the plan for the day?
The plan for me, as I saw it, and just said, look, I think we all understand when you look at this day's schedule, we're not going to make this. This is not going to happen. And what I don't want to do is start short-changing the scenes that we have in front of us. What we're going to do is we are going to do the scenes that are in front of us. We're going to do them properly. We're going to work our way through. And whatever's left at the end of the day, we can't control that. That's left at the end of the day, and we'll have to figure out tomorrow. But today we're going to do what we can. Okay.
And so if you recall, approximately what time were you able to get filming underway?
Man, it might have been like 9 something. I seem to remember 9 something, because that's, you know, you're getting going a couple hours late at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you recall, what were the first, what were the scenes that were filmed in that session before lunch?
Yeah, we were sort of tucked into a corner of the town. It's a scene where the head lawman in the movie, character's name is Wood. He brings a few other lawmen into town. So it's a decent sized undertaking in that you've got animals. I think we had a mule or a donkey there, and some other animals. We had horses, wagons, a lot of extras. And you have these 3 characters riding into town at a decent pace and then coming in. It was essentially, it's before a scene and after a scene, if that makes sense. We were filming the first part of a scene where they ride into town. At a different time, we had already filmed the scene where they would walk in to have this business they were dealing with. And then we were filming again their exit.
And during the filming of those scenes, were there any close-up shots of revolvers that would have made the use of dummy rounds appropriate that you can recall?
We did no close-ups in those. It was wide versions of them riding into town and then getting off. It wasn't a lot of shots, to be honest, because you have something that big and pretty, you sort of tend to back up a little bit and show it off. And then when they were leaving, it was the character, I'll tell you exactly what it was. His foot goes into the holster. We come up with camera to reveal him getting onto his horse and 2 men behind him, and then they ride out. That starts at what's sort of more termed as a medium shot, and then becomes a wide shot as they leave.
And were there any other scenes that were filmed
up the road to the church and filmed a good amount of interior stuff in the church?
And the scenes inside the church, did those involve Mr. Baldwin?
Yes.
And if you know, were those scenes filmed in such close proximity that dummy rounds may be advisable?
I think a few shots, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and for other characters too. because we'd also filmed the marshals coming in. Essentially, the scene is the young boy helps his grandfather in. We filmed that a few times. He sits him down in a church pew, and then the boy runs out to get help.
And let me stop you.
Yeah.
The grandfather of the young boy.
I'm sorry, is Alex. The character's name is Harlan Rust.
And that's Mr. Baldwin's
Yeah,
character.
and the boy is his character's called Lucas.
Okay.
So Lucas brings Rust in. And Rust has been previous scene. He's bleeding. The boy's going to go try to find help. He runs out. Then the lawmen come in, which we filmed, them coming in, fanning out around the church, talking to the Rust character, and the Rust character is slumped over in the pew. So we filmed most of, if not all of the pieces of the lawmen coming in, looking that way. We filmed a good portion of the pieces of the characters, the Rust and Lucas coming in before that.
Okay.
We did that all before lunch.
Okay. And after the filming of those scenes, what happened?
After the filming of that part of the scene, it was time for lunch. They called lunch.
When they call lunch, where do you go?
We had, everyone tends to get in the vans and go back to base camp. I remember Alec was still there as people were clearing out, and he and I and Halyna talked a little bit about what was still to come, because we were going to pick literally right up where we left off after lunch. And people would go to get in the pass vans. It wasn't very far, but there was a decent sized hill they would have to go over. So they would just sort of, it would be faster to drive them in vans over to where we would have lunch.
Okay. And what happened when lunch was over?
Lunch was over. Everybody migrates back to the church, and you pick up where you left off.
Were you inside the church immediately after lunch was over?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you stay inside the church the entire time between when lunch ended and when the shooting occurred?
No. I at a certain point went outside of the church.
And why were you doing that?
So when we were setting up the camera angle, we were talking about what the shot was supposed to be. And forgive me if I over-explain this, but the scene is very tense, right? And so you achieve that through editing and camera angles. And so you want to see Rust sitting there. Is he dead? Is he alive? The men coming closer, they're ordering him to give up. And then you cut to close-ups, and you're cutting from the character to the lawmen back and forth. And the first shot was supposed to essentially be the first moment we might realize that Rust is not, in fact, as injured as we might have thought. And so it was going to be a close-up on the weapon coming out of the holster. And so we talked about that a little bit. Halyna and I had talked, and there's Reed there, Serge was there. They're talking about the lighting. And then at a certain point, it's time to set the camera angle up. It's not a rehearsal yet. You're just sort of what they call auditioning the shot. Like, do you like this camera angle?
Okay.
And so once they do that, the camera was a mechanically heavy piece of equipment, and it was in the middle of an aisle between pews. So the pews were here and the dollies in the middle. And you're in a tight place like that, I start moving the gear around, feel like I'm in the way. And so I got out of the way and went outside, and I figured, well, we still had one monitor. There was no village anymore that day, or that I'm aware of. Not in the traditional sense that there would be monitors lined up, but there was still a monitor that I could see the camera through.
Where was that monitor?
That was outside of the church. I don't remember if they had it on a stand or if it was on a cart. It was not a big one, but they were trying to get image up on the monitor of having come back from lunch. And after a time, the image was just not coming up. And so I decided, before they get too far afield, if they're sort of setting this up in a way that I think isn't going to work, I would like to at least stop them and say, no, let's move it here. And so that's when I went back inside to have a look.
So at any point in time, did you see Ms. Gutierrez enter the church with the firearm?
No, it wasn't. I wasn't aware of her coming in or leaving or anything. The church was, there's an enormous amount going on. A million voices, it feels like. The special effects guys are rigging things up in the roof for debris for later on. When the shooting starts, there'll be debris falling down. And There are people working the lights. There are people moving the cameras. There's a lot going on. And so I didn't really register that.
Do you have any idea who provided Mr. Baldwin his revolver for the scene?
No, I mean, just beyond in a general sense about who's supposed to hand it off, but no, I didn't see anybody give it to him.
Okay. Does Mr. Baldwin get his revolver?
I mean, he clearly had it. The interesting thing, I never saw him with it. I mean, he clearly had it because of what happened, but when I went in to look at to see what was going on with the camera angle, I remember there's sort of a big group kind of hovered around where he would be. He would be sitting in the pew. I just couldn't see him. I'm not the tallest guy in the world. And so what I wanted to do is get up behind Halyna to try to sneak a look over her. There's a little tiny monitor on the side of the camera to at least see that, to see what it was looking like. But I never even got a look at that.
Okay. So explain to us when you're going into the church and why and what you do and what happens.
So I went inside again to try to see what the angle was. There were a lot of voices. I heard Alec's voice. I heard Halyna's voice. I don't have a clear memory of how long I was standing behind her. I know I got up behind her to try to see on the monitor. And there was like the half and quarter loads you hear on a set. Those are sort of, they're loud poofs and pops. This was deafening. And it felt like somebody had taken a baseball bat to my shoulder. I remember that distinctly, and sort of stumbling back and shouting. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Were you able to see Ms. Hutchins at that time?
I did. I remember sort of stumbling back, and I either fell to my knees or I was sitting, and I distinctly remember her being lowered to the ground. People had her sort of by either side, and I still didn't quite know what had happened. Nothing made sense. I remember initially thinking, had she been startled by it? And they were sitting her down as a result. And then I saw the blood on her back.
And to the best of your recollection, what happened after that?
It got very chaotic. I remember them laying me down. I remember them laying her down next to me. Although we were sort of facing in opposite directions, my head was this way, her head was that way. I remember a lot of panic. I still just couldn't figure out what had happened. I thought, was there something that had been stuck in the barrel that came out? But just nothing made sense. I remember our dolly grip, Ross, coming to sort of grab me and trying to call me, and then Matt Hemmer came in, and between the two of them, I remember they sort of tended to me and were pulling up and just trying to find out.
Do you recall, Mr. Souza, at any point in time during that general time after the gun went off?
I remember at one point looking up and her standing there looked distraught. And I remember her saying, I'm sorry, Joel. And I remember somebody just screaming at her, and they just ushered her out.
Okay. At some point in time, were you taken from the scene?
Yeah, it's funny. When I hear later about how long we laid there, it felt like 5 minutes. And I remember looking over and her looking back at me. And she had the biggest brown eyes I've ever seen. And then, but when I don't remember who they took out first. They put me on some kind of stretcher and rolled me out.
And where did they take you?
They told me they were going to take me to they said they were going to take me to the hospital, and I kept begging them to take me where she was, but they said they couldn't and that they would later. And they eventually took me to, I think it's Christus St. Vincent, I think that's what it's called, in Santa Fe.
And when you were at the hospital, did you have an understanding that you had been actually shot by a bullet?
No. I mean, I knew something got me, but they kept talking about this bullet, and it could not compute for me. I just kept saying, you don't understand. No, this was a movie set. That's not possible. You don't get it. And they kept saying, no, it is. And I just keep insisting, you don't understand, because this is not possible. It's just not possible that there's a live round. It just can't. And then they eventually maybe grew tired of my protesting about it, because they showed me the x-ray of my back, and there was a very large bullet in it.
Okay. And sir, do you know whether Ms. Gutierrez was inside the church at the time that the gun went off?
I don't know.
In your experience, would you have had an expectation that she would have been in the church?
Yeah, the armor would be where the gun is.
Okay. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So, Mr. Souza, I think before you testified that before the Rust movie, your experience with firearms was on Crown Vic. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay, and that was a movie you directed.
I directed and wrote Crown Vic, yeah.
And you wrote that, okay.
Yeah.
And that, I think you said, had a couple scenes involving firearms. Is that right?
Well, where guns were fired, there were a few, yeah.
So you had an armorer on that set? Was that armorer full-time?
He was there for the days that the guns were going to be used or fired, yeah.
Is that the only occasion you've ever worked on a set with an armorer?
Yeah.
Okay. So is it fair to say your experience with working with armorers was fairly limited prior to
Up to that point, yeah.
Okay. So are you familiar with safety rules where if the armorer or prop master are not present, a responsibility falls on the AD?
I don't think I ever really reviewed the SAG rules. I don't think I would have been aware of what the procedure would have been if the armor wasn't there. I think my assumption was always that the armor was supposed to be there.
Okay, and you made an assumption, but if there's a SAG rule that indicates that responsibility then falls on the AD, are you aware of that?
That's not a rule that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so you have not reviewed the SAG rules with respect to armors in general, or firearm safety in general?
No, I'm not a SAG member, so.
Okay.
But no, I haven't, no.
Okay, so if in the church at that time, Ms. Gutierrez Reed was not present, And you don't remember?
I don't.
Okay, but Mr. Halls he was the first assistant director, correct?
He was the first assistant director, yes.
Now, you don't remember, I think you said, seeing who handed Mr. Baldwin the firearm.
That's correct.
And I think you said, sir, you don't remember Mr. Baldwin even having the revolver. You didn't see it. I mean, he had to have had it, but
I know he had it before lunch.
Yeah.
I know he had to have had it for obvious reasons, but I didn't see him have it.
before lunch, did you see who handed Mr. Baldwin the revolver?
No, I remember at some point before lunch hearing Dave call out Colt gun, but I don't remember who handed it to him.
Okay, and that's Dave Halls?
Yeah.
And Mr. Halls called out Colt gun before lunch that you remember?
As I remember that, yeah.
Okay. Was the blocking done before lunch as well for that scene?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on in that scene. We had sort of gotten to a certain point in it. What was coming next, we had not practiced before. What was coming next was essentially just picking up where we left off. That was what's called an insert. It was an insert shot.
Okay, sir. And this insert shot, this was going to be after lunch.
That was our first shot up after lunch.
Okay. And was this an insert shot, an extreme close-up on the hand as it's pulling from the holster?
Yeah, it was what I had in mind was, again, I talked about it a little bit before, but you have the hand kind of coming out like this, pulling it. Yeah.
And when you just demonstrated that, you had your hand coming across and pulling in front of you?
Correct.
Okay.
Because that's where his thing was up here, so it would have naturally been going that way.
And do you know whether from the script, whether that firearm was supposed to be pointed towards the camera?
Well, I mean, it's not a matter of the script, really. For that specific shot, it was literally just supposed to be the gun being pulled out sideways.
Okay, sir. And when you demonstrated that, you did not have your hand pointed forward?
No.
Okay. So in that extreme close-up shot, it was just supposed to be pulled out in front?
Right.
Okay.
It was very short.
Okay. And was that designed to be like an insert to build tension in the scene?
Yeah, you cut back and forth and back and forth. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I understand. So at the time that occurred, after lunch, when you're doing that extreme close-up scene, was that called a blocking?
Yeah, it's sort of blocking for camera. Yeah, to see, they want to see where the focus needs to be, and how it's going to look, which way the camera's going to be oriented, essentially. When I said auditioning the shot, it's essentially the same thing as the camera blocking for the shot.
So in essence, that scene is just setting up. There's not even filming going on at that point.
Correct.
Okay. So with regard to that, did you ever hear Mr. Baldwin insist on having his revolver for that scene?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Were you aware that generally during the movie he liked to have his hero guns?
I don't think it's unusual for actors to like that thing. I mean, again, in hindsight, it would have been easy to sort of say, focus on that and think about it. At the time, I don't know that I had a sort of a clear understanding of that or not.
Okay.
I still want to speculate. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. So your knowledge of that kind of firearm and in that particular scene at that time, it wasn't very extensive.
Right.
Okay. So in that scene, there's a blocking, and it's just going to be an extreme close-up. You were paying attention to the camera, as I understand. You're trying to look at the monitor.
Right. Like I said, I wanted to see what the angle was, but since the monitor wasn't up yet, I thought, well, I should go inside and try to catch a look at it there, because if it doesn't fit what I need to come next, they're very specific pieces I need.
Okay.
And if it doesn't fit what comes next, we should stop. There was not a lot of time to waste that day. So
absolutely. The day started off behind.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that your attention was focused on trying to get the right kind of camera angle for that extreme close-up?
Yeah, because there's no real performance at play there. It's more of a technical exercise. It's just, here's what I need to happen in this close-up in the editing room so that I can get this to work.
At that time, and taking it back to that time, you're more focused on trying to get the scene set up. Your focus is not on looking around to see if Miss Gutierrez Reed is in the church. Is that fair?
I'd say that's fair, correct.
And so at the time, did it occur to you at all to look around and see if the armor is there, and if not, to call her, semi-call her?
No, I wouldn't say that it did.
Okay. And because at that time, there wasn't even going to be more than just pulling out of a holster, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you didn't hear, well, you didn't know she was in the church, so obviously you didn't hear anybody go get her or call her back in.
Like I said, there were so many voices going on. No, I'm just trying to focus on what I can focus on.
It was a little bit, it's all kinds of things are going on at that moment. There's people trying to set up the cameras, and tell me if I'm wrong, or why don't you tell it in your words?
Well, just a lot of people moving in a lot of different directions. There's the special effects people hanging what are called poppers from the ceiling. They're sort of what I talk about. They will, during the gunfight, they will pop and then debris will come raining down. There are people positioning lights. There are people moving cameras. There are wardrobe people in and out. There are, there's just a lot. It's, and under normal circumstances, it's quite a thing to watch, frankly.
I also want to ask you on the long rifle, the Henry rifle, did you have much knowledge of how the Henry rifle works?
Beyond what I'd read about it when I was writing the script, no, I know it's a lever action, and that's what appealed to me in a visual sense. And, but beyond that, not really, no.
Okay. Do you have much experience in general with knowing types of firearms, how they function?
No, outside of movies, I have nothing to do with guns.
Okay. Now, on that Henry rifle, there was one scene in the script where Mr. Baldwin's character is supposed to come out of the shack or whatever the structure is, and he's firing at the lawman. You remember that, sir?
Right.
And that involved, did that involve his hero gun, the Henry rifle?
He was carrying it. He was not going to be firing it. It proved impractical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So do you know that the Henry rifle is made such that there's a plunger on the bottom, and when the rounds are loaded, you can see or not see if rounds are in that rifle?
No, like I said, I'm not any kind of expert on a rifle.
Okay. Part of the armor's duties, would you agree with, they're to be there also for if the particular weapon Mr. Baldwin's holding needs to look like it's loaded, that's their job. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. Because you got to have a realistic feel for the audience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the entire reason dummies exist.
Okay. And so if the Henry rifle, if you can see at the bottom whether rounds are loaded or dummy rounds are loaded or not, that would be something that would you would want the armorer to handle.
If it was required for the scene, yes.
Okay. And in that particular scene, Mr. Baldwin is going to confront these lawmen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, with regard to dummies, I think you said before this, before Rust, you weren't very familiar with dummies either.
I wasn't really familiar with the term of it. I think, I guess it's, I would have assumed that there was, if I'd watch a Western and you see something and they have a gun pointed and there's something at the end of there's something in the cylinders or whatever those are called. I think I would assume there's something in there. I wouldn't quite know what it is, but
okay.
Yeah.
And you talked about on the second go round in your direct, you completed the Rust filming?
We did.
And on that second filming, did you use wooden dummies?
I wouldn't even call them dummies because they didn't ever get loaded into anything. When there was a situation where we had to match previous shots, like on a band, that go round had made them out of wood and then painted them and tucked them into the bandoliers.
Okay. And the purpose of a dummy round when it comes to safety on the set, who is the person in general that's responsible?
Well, I think in a general sense, I mean, the first assistant director is the safety officer on set. But beyond that, I think it also, there's a set is generally a real, if you see something, say something thing. So everybody is responsible to some degree to try to make sure there's a safe work environment. In terms of our safety officer, generally the first AD is the safety officer.
And what you just said, and first AD is in charge of that, but if anybody on set sees something unsafe, they should say something.
Yes, I think an example would be if there's a extension cord that's not taped down, or there's something that someone could hit their head on or something. You want to try to head those things off. There are a lot of sharp corners on movie sets.
Now, ultimately, with regard to safety, the producers are where the buck stops. Do you agree with that?
I think the producers are the people who write the. I don't think a movie set is any different.
One other portion, Mr. Baldwin, when you talked about earlier about the armorer saying something to him, did you ever communicate to the armorer that she had issues that she needed to confront Mr. Baldwin or tell Mr. Baldwin, or did you ever say anything about that?
I don't think we ever talked about that. I think she and I might have had 2 conversations all told.
Okay.
But that wouldn't have been one of them.
Okay. And would you agree with me, Mr. Baldwin has a fairly strong personality in that movie?
Sure. I think, yeah.
And we saw some clips on that. Finally, you mentioned that the day 3, you felt good about how that went. And it was an amazing team of professionals, I think you said, that pulled together and did a good job. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we had a very strong crew.
And Ms. Gutierrez Reed also performed very well that day.
Yeah, on that day, I didn't take any issue. I was happy with everybody.
Okay. All right, Your Honor, may I have just a moment? I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Just briefly, Mr. Souza, do you recall a single scene that was going to be filmed in the movie where anyone was loading the rifle with ammunition?
No.
Do you recall a single scene in the movie that was going to be filmed where anyone was cycling ammunition through the rifle?
No.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
You're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Can we approach real quick?
Yeah, but we're not taking a lunch break.
What's that?
I'm not sure what's taking so long here. Um, I'm not sure what's taking so long here. Mm. I can only assume they're debating about whether to call the next witness or go to lunch. I guess while we're waiting, let's go over to the press conference for the Michelle Traconis. Oh, no, that's not. We're not going to go to that one because that's Fox. Okay, let's go over and listen to the Madeline Soto press conference, which took place a few minutes ago.
Evidence. According to an affidavit from Kissimmee Police, and this is coming from the reporting by Wesh, here is the sheriff. Let's listen in.
So thank you for being here. We have some important developments in this case that we want to share with our community. I wish we were here to tell you that we have found Madeline, but we have not found her. Last night, detectives from the Kissimmee Police Department met with Madeline's mother, and they had to tell her the very devastating news that although we have not found Madeline, we are now confident that she is dead. So our efforts will be focused on recovering Madeline. Dozens and dozens of detectives, crime analysts, and specialized team members have been working nonstop and following up on every single lead and every shred of evidence. Our detectives have determined that Madeline was never dropped off on the morning of February 26th near her school. Instead, we believe she was already dead at the time and that Stephen Stearns moved her body in the early morning hours on that day. We have video evidence that shows Stephen Stearns discarding items.
The state calls Emory Chacon.
Face the judge, raise your right hand.
Do you swear affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you just move a little closer to the microphone and speak into the microphone, sir?
There we go.
Thank you. Would you state your name?
Name is Emory Chacon.
And in October of 2021, how were you employed?
I worked the front desk at the Inn at Santa Fe.
And during that same month, did you befriend Hannah Gutierrez?
I did.
And during your friendship with her, did you have how did you get to know Ms. Gutierrez through your work at the hotel?
Well, I worked second shift, so I check in guests. It's my job to be polite, friendly to guests, so I'll talk.
Was Ms. Gutierrez a guest at the hotel?
Yes.
From the set of Rust were also staying at that hotel.
There were other crew members.
And at any point in time during your friendship with Ms. Gutierrez, did you have an opportunity to be in her hotel room?
Yes.
And if you recall, approximately how many times would you have been in her hotel room?
Can't really recall. Maybe a handful of times.
Handful of times, okay. And when you were in her hotel room, did you ever take notice of any boxes of ammunition?
Yes.
And I want to be clear, are you familiar with?
I am.
Based on your experience, were you able to determine whether the ammunition was for pistols or rifles or anything?
I saw what looked like maybe a couple of rifle, maybe shotgun shells, maybe one pistol round.
And when you say that you saw the rounds, were they in boxes?
There were a few that were not in boxes that were sitting on the counter in the room.
And to the best of your recollection, were any of the rounds that were not in boxes pistol rounds?
One.
One was a pistol round. Do you recall approximately when you saw, and let me ask you, other than the rounds that were not in boxes, did you see boxes inside? Did you also see boxes of ammunition in the room?
Yes.
And do you know whether the ammunition that you saw was real ammunition or fake ammunition for the movie?
I don't know the physical difference between fake ammunition and.
Do you recall approximately when you would have noticed the ammunition in her hotel room?
It was maybe towards an evening. In terms of like exactly what day, I can't give.
Do you know whether it was towards the beginning of her stay or the end of her stay?
Towards the beginning.
Did you see the ammunition in her room on more than one occasion?
No.
Just one occasion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Prosecutor.
Thank you. So, Mr. Traconis, I think you said you were a hotel desk clerk?
Yes, sir.
And sir, what hotel was that?
The NS Santa Fe.
Okay. As part of being a desk clerk at the hotel, did you check Ms. Gutierrez Reed in when she started her stay?
I did.
Now, you did not know her before that, right?
No.
So you just came acquainted with her and to stay there. At the start of her stay is when you believe you saw the ammunition. What day was that?
I can't recall.
Do you recall if that was in September of 2021, October of 2021? Do you have any idea?
Maybe mid-September.
Late September?
About.
Okay. Okay, and you were up in her room. I know that you all texted, that you had texted Ms. Gutierrez Reed, is that right?
Yes.
And did you go to a movie with her one time?
Yes.
Now, after that, didn't you want to keep texting her and have a different type of relationship with her?
Quite possibly.
Okay. That's what you wanted, isn't it, at that time?
Not too sure how it would have worked out, but perhaps.
Okay. And it was pretty clear from her text back that that's not what she wanted to do, right?
Yes.
Okay. Over a period of time, you kept texting her and she just quit texting. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know that you said on direct that you can't tell the live ammunition from a blank ammunition, for example. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. And you also probably wouldn't be able to tell a dummy round from a live round, right?
Correct.
Now, these boxes that you had mentioned, do you remember what color they were?
I remember they were kind of a army green, hard plastic.
Okay, and you just don't know exactly what was in them or what they contained?
No.
Okay. And in late September, you're aware that the filming had not started yet for the movie, or do you have any knowledge of that? Okay. Do you have any knowledge of when the movie started filming?
No knowledge.
Okay. Your Honor, nothing further. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
The state calls Wyatt Mortensen.
Stand before the judge, raise your hand.
Do you swear affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Have a seat. Talk into the microphone.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Go ahead and state your name for the record.
Wyatt Mortensen.
Mr. Mortensen, what do you do for a living?
I'm a wrangler and stuntman.
Explain to the jury what it means to be a wrangler.
We take care of the horses on the movie set. We give actors riding lessons, and we make sure that nothing bad happens to the horses or anybody that's around them.
Were you employed as a wrangler on the set of Rust?
I was.
In your capacity as a wrangler on the set of Rust, how frequently were you on set?
Pretty much every day.
Okay. And in addition to taking care of horses, were you also in some of the scenes that were filmed?
I was.
And in what capacity were you in those scenes?
I would dress out and drive wagons or ride horses in the background, some stunts.
Okay, great. Can you give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury an idea about your background and experience in the film industry as a wrangler and or stuntman?
Yes. I just got in the industry when I turned 18, which was 4 years ago. And since then, I've been working pretty frequently on 24 films, give or take. As a wrangler and stunts, I've worked with numerous actors and many different people that are big in the movie industry.
Mr. Mortensen, prior to working on the set of Rust, did you work on any other movies that had guns and armorers?
I did.
Do you recall approximately how many films you worked on that had guns and armors prior to Rust?
About every movie I've worked on.
Okay, every movie.
Yes,
Can you give us an idea of how many movies that would have been prior to Rust?
Prior to Rust, maybe 5, I'd say.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity while you were on set to see Ms. Gutierrez perform her work as the set armorer?
I did.
And was there anything about the manner in which she performed her work that caused you concern?
Nothing directly.
Let me ask you this. Do you recall, can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how she brought the guns and ammunition to set from the prop cart?
Just carry them by hand.
Did that seem unusual to you?
Nothing too unusual. No.
Mr. Mortensen, do you, hang on just one second. Do you recall an incident where a rifle was lost on the set?
I do.
Can you explain to us how a rifle was lost or what you recall about that?
We were doing a stunt in the middle of town, and after we were done,
I was asked if I've seen a rifle anywhere on set.
Do you recall who asked you that?
I do not.
Okay. Do you know whether the rifle was found?
I don't.
Mr. Mortensen, did you ever take notice of guns and ammunition being left unattended on set?
I did.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you saw with regard to guns and ammunition being left unattended?
I seen guns and ammunition on a small cart that was left on the set periodically.
And when you say periodically, how frequently do you think you saw guns and ammunition left unattended on that cart?
Most days that we had guns.
In your experience with armorers on movie sets, did that seem unusual to you?
Yes.
And if you recall, or if you can estimate, approximately how long would the guns and ammunition be left unattended on that cart?
I can't truly recollect.
Sir, do you recall in this case having a pretrial interview where you had to show up and talk to us about your testimony?
Via Zoom, yes.
Yeah, that's right, via Zoom. Do you recall specifically what you said during that interview about approximately how long the guns and ammunition would be left unattended?
I can't remember.
Would it refresh your memory if I showed you a transcript of our conversation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. May I?
Yes.
And if you want me to scroll. Did that refresh your memory?
Yes, it did.
Okay, can you answer my question now?
Yeah. Close to an hour or so. Yeah, sometimes more.
Do you have personal experience with firearms?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the difference between real firearms and replica or fake firearms?
If I'm handed one and I can see it closely, yes.
Do you know whether the firearms that you saw regularly left unattended on the prop cart were real?
Yes, most of them seemed real.
Okay, and when you say they seemed real, how would you know that?
Just because most of the guns on the movie set were real.
And did you see scenes that were filmed on the movie where the guns would shoot blanks?
Yes.
Do fake guns fire blanks?
No.
Okay, only real guns fire blanks, right?
Yes.
Okay. And sir, did you take note during your time on the set of Rust? Did you notice whether or not Ms. Gutierrez's conduct as an armorer with regard to handing firearms to actors and taking firearms away from actors when a scene was over? Do you recall taking note of that?
Yes.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what, if anything, you noticed about the manner or how quickly Ms. Gutierrez would remove real firearms from actors when a scene was over?
It would depend on the scene and who the actors were.
Do you recall taking note that when a scene would be over, she would not immediately collect the firearms from the actors.
Yes.
Did that stand out to you?
Yes.
Why?
Every other show I'd been on previous to that, the armor would hand the gun right before the scene and take it away right after.
And that was not Ms. Gutierrez's practice?
Not that I can recollect.
Okay. And sir, do you have personal knowledge and experience with revolvers?
Fairly decent.
Do you recall taking note of the manner in which Ms. Gutierrez would conduct the barrel check of the revolvers?
There's a few moments that I did notice. Yes.
Okay. But first of all, I want you to kind of explain to the jury what your understanding is of why a barrel check is done and how it should be done.
Well, from my experience, the reason.
You're on mute first.
Sure.
Objection. Mr. Mortensen, let's proceed. Did you notice anything that caught your eye about the way that Ms. Gutierrez would conduct the barrel checks?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you notice specifically?
Can you describe specifically?
Well, let me do this. Do you recall discussing this during the interview that we did with you over Zoom?
I believe so, yes.
Do you recall exactly what you said to us that day?
I think so, yeah.
Do you need to see it to have your memory refreshed at all?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Tim? Mayor? Let me make sure I'm on the right spot. Okay. Which line is Carrie? 10 through 21? And take your time. Mr. Mortensen, did that refresh your memory?
Yes, ma'am. So there would be moments on the set, and one that I can truly recollect was she took the gun from Alec and to check to see if the gun was clean, which there's a process that armors do. And
Can you tell the jury in your experience what that process is?
yeah, in my experience, you always make sure you check if a gun is clean or how many rounds are inside the gun. But what you can do is you open the cylinder, and this is speaking with single action pistols, and you take the cylinder out, and because blanks have a lot of debris that comes out with the gunpowder, you check the barrel sometimes to just see if anything is lodged in there, because that can shoot out with the gunpowder. And you open the cylinder and you can look down the barrel, and if the cylinder is open, it's impossible to be shot or anything bad happen, because you can see straight through and you see daylight through the barrel of the gun.
And what caught your eye about the way that Ms. Gutierrez did those barrel checks?
When she looked, the cylinder was closed.
And so in your experience, when she looks and the cylinder is closed, what would she be able to see?
Nothing.
I'll pass the witness.
Cross-exam.
Mr. Mortensen, isn't it true that you can see light through that barrel just by pulling back the hammer?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of? You're not an armor, are you?
No, ma'am.
And you've never worked as an armor on any movie, have you?
No, ma'am.
In fact, in the filming of Rust, you were a wrangler, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Your responsibility is
Yes, ma'am.
donkeys.
No.
You weren't responsible for the donkey? I thought we heard testimony about a donkey. That wasn't you, right?
Not that I can recollect.
Okay. And in fact, during the Rust filming, isn't it true that you didn't even wear a real firearm? You had a replica rubber gun, right?
Not that I can recollect.
You don't recollect if you wore if you had a real firearm on Rust? Is that what you're saying?
I can't remember if I had even a gun belt on.
Okay. At any time when you would have a gun on Rust, wasn't it a rubber one?
Not that I can recollect.
So you don't remember if you had a real gun or a rubber gun on this movie set. Is that what you're saying?
I can remember holding both a live gun and a rubber gun, but.
On the filming of Rust?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, in your direct testimony, one of the things I thought I wrote down that I heard you say was there is nothing directly about Ms. Gutierrez's work on that set that caused you concern. Do you remember telling the jury that in direct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you saw these guns on top of that cart, you weren't right over the prop cart, right? You were further away from that.
Beside it.
Were you even able to tell if these were non-functioning or functioning firearms?
Not that I could tell.
Okay, so in your have you ever seen on any of the movies you've worked on a part-time armor?
Never.
And in this filming on Rust, was there a time when horses ever got loose?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that that was an extremely dangerous situation?
I'll object to. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's approach.
Mr. Mortensen, do you need me to repeat the question?
No.
Okay, so can you answer the question?
Yes.
So, horses, it is a dangerous thing to have horses on set, right?
Yes.
And you were the one responsible for wrangling those, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall a time on Rust when you had a problem getting paid on time? Can we approach? Mr. Mortensen, I'll re-ask the question here. So do you ever recall a time on Rust when you had a problem getting paid on time?
I can't truly recollect.
Would it refresh your memory to take a look at your pre-trial interview transcript?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, just a sec. Oh, that's fine. Okay. You got any official witness? Let me know when you're done. Did that refresh your recollection?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So was there ever a time on Rust that you recall not being paid on time?
Yes, at the very beginning.
Okay, just a second, Your Honor. No further questions. Two more questions, maybe one, or two. Mr. Mortensen, have you ever testified in court before?
No, ma'am.
I want to be clear. Did you see guns left unattended on the prop cart after shooting scenes that involved the firing of blank ammunition?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
All right, this witness is excused. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, we're going to take our lunch break. Please be back at 1:10. Okay, downstairs at 1:10. Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court. Thank you.
All rise.
Forgot to unmute. Okay, so we've got an hour break. I'm thinking of shutting down and coming back in an hour so that I can get a few things done over the lunch hour. And so hopefully you'll join us back then. And till then, have a great lunch. Bye-bye.